This is Keys to the Shop, Founder Friday edition. Today is the first part of a two-part episode with Doug Zell of Intelligentsia Coffee and the Meteor. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio, and I'm your host for the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me. Of course, please do subscribe to the show. Just hit that button. It means so much to the success of Keys to the Shop. You get to download and listen to all the current and past episodes and search the episodes to your heart's delight. And we get a good idea of who's listening, and you get the benefit of the great content. It's a win-win. So go ahead and subscribe. And also please do share these episodes when you have the opportunity. Leave a 5-star rating and review over at Apple Podcasts too, if you feel like it. And thank you everyone for doing that. Now, Keys to the Shop is not just producing a podcast, but the other way that Keys to the Shop helps the community is through coaching and consultation. I've been so fortunate to get to work with so many business owners and operators to help them level up their operations, people, and quality in their cafes. And if you are interested in one-on-one coaching to help you find solutions, gain profitability, build a thriving coffee shop, and really rediscover a new sense of joy in ownership and operation, go ahead and email chris@keystotheshop.com. That's CHRIS @keystotheshop.com. We'll set up a free discovery call and talk all about what's going on and how Keys to the Shop Consulting can help you. Chris@keystotheshop.com. So over the years, one of the marks of the industry's maturing is the innovation in technology that allows us to serve better and better coffee. That's why I'm always so excited to promote the Ground Control Brewer. This brewer uses SCA award-winning technology to give you unprecedented control and access to flavors in coffee that previous technology just couldn't touch. The new brewer from Ground Control is 45% less than the original Cyclops, the iconic Cyclops brewer. You've probably seen it around. This new brewer is 24 inches high. That's significantly shorter than the old brewer. Plus, it's a 30% higher volume for batch espresso and cold brew concentrate, and it's cloud connected to a smart dispenser that tracks all your brewing data. So when I say 45% less, that savings in that investment is for early bird special pricing. So go ahead and take advantage of that soon, because it's not going to last. Go to groundcontrol.coffee and get that deal right now. This brewer is amazing, and I think you really need to look at it for your cafe. If you're looking for the next level of coffee brewing, groundcontrol.coffee. Now, I'm so thankful for companies that really are there to serve the community that uses their products, and no company out there is a better example of this than the Barista series from Pacific. This line of performance plant-based beverages is designed for baristas, and they take all the feedback that they get from professional baristas, and they actually take that seriously, and it factors into how this stuff is made. That's why it works so well. Stands up to the heat from steaming, produces awesome texture for latte art, keeps the flavor balance focused on the coffee. Go to pacificfoodservice.com to get samples, try it for yourself, learn more there. I think you're really going to love this, and so will your customers. If you're looking for the best plant-based beverages for your guests, then I think you need to try the Barista series from Pacific. Okay, everyone. Well, this is part 1 of a 2-part Founder Friday episode calling Switching Gears, featuring the founder of Intelligentsia Coffee and the Meteor, Doug Zell. Since Doug and co-founder Emily founded Intelligentsia in 1995, the company has grown to be one of the world's most influential coffee brands, specialty coffee brands. Under Doug's leadership, Intelligentsia grew from a small shop in Chicago to now shops and roasting operations across the U.S. with accolades across disciplines of design, roasting, coffee trade, barista championships, and more. The team at Intelligentsia's dedication to pushing the envelope of coffee establishes it as a global pillar of the coffee culture. And after the acquisition of Intelligentsia by Peet's Coffee in 2016, Doug Zell took his lessons that he has learned and how he's developed as a leader over the 20 years of Intelligentsia and channeled that plus a love for cycling and coffee and innovation into the Meteor. Now, this first part of our episode will focus on the story of Intelligentsia and how it paved the way for Doug to switch gears in 2015 with the Meteor. And we will discuss the early years of Intelligentsia, the values, the frameworks, scaling the cafes in the beginning to, across the United States with the training labs and roasteries and all of the things that you need to kind of think about when you are at the helm of such a large company grown from the same kind of values that were from the very beginning, that dedication to pushing the envelope, innovation, doing things with excellence, and figuring out what's next in coffee. That's why Intelligentsia is such a household name in specialty coffee. And we get to hear it right from the founder himself, Doug Zell, today, somebody that I've known ever since I discovered specialty coffee. And if you have been in this game for any length of time, chances are you have been greatly influenced by the groundwork laid by people at Intelligentsia. And I'm really grateful to have Doug on the show to tell this story. So this is the first part. And the second part of our episode will be part 2 that will focus on the Meteor and the story of how Doug came to found that and what has gone into its development. But for now, let's get right into the story of Intelligentsia. I'm really excited to share this with you all. Here now is my interview with the founder himself, Doug Zell. All right, Doug, welcome to Keys to the Shop. Such an honor to have you on the show. How's it going?
Excellent. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is a very interesting situation here because I feel like your history in the industry is so rich and we only have so much time on a podcast. So I'm really excited to launch into this. And at the same time, I feel like there's so many layers here in your life in coffee and your influence. And so it's an honor to have you on the show. And I've been in coffee long enough to have been aware of Intelligentsia when you were around. You founded it in 1995. I got into coffee in 1999. Things were still kind of fresh then, but it's always been this ubiquitous presence of, what you've created in the industry all the way up until now with the Meteor. So we kind of want to look at all those little chapters here, but of course we want to start with the start. And maybe the right question to ask here is, you started Intelligentsia with intention to do something in coffee. What made you want to do something in coffee at all?
I had a business prior to it that was not successful, and that was something in tea. It was a bottled stevia sweetened iced tea in 1988.
I did not know this.
Yeah. Anyway, it's clearly it's no longer around, so we can assess whether or not it was successful. That was the first chapter. It was a stevia sweetened iced tea. A friend of mine and I started it in California. I was sitting at a place across the street from where I lived in Columbus, Ohio, with what I like to say was the only real job I ever had. And they were out of iced tea. And I said, wouldn't it be great if there was a iced tea in a bottle? And, we went down this path of trying to alternative sweetener, which was stevia, which was nice for a moment. But at that time, it was not generally recognized as safe by the FDA.
Oh, you were ahead of your time.
Fast forward, and our inventory was seized, and we reformulated with juice as the sweetener. And, after 4 years of effort and getting into what was then kind of precursors to Whole Foods, a number of the places they acquired, it just didn't work. The profit margin wasn't there. There was a lot of things we didn't know at that point. So it wasn't successful. And at that point was living in the Bay Area, because we started that business in Los Angeles, moved it to the Bay Area. And then after it failed, I went to go work in coffee, actually at Peet's Coffee.
Oh, wow.
So, was a barista there, moved up there, and then worked for another roaster. So I think that the lesson learned supposedly from the tea experience was that if one could create an environment where one had control over the experience and the products being served, et cetera, that it would have a greater opportunity for success than if you just had this product that you tried to put into distribution with no context, if that makes sense. I arrived in San Francisco really when the brunt of the second wave was ascending. Like I said, I worked for Peet's and then another roaster named Spinelli Coffee that was ultimately acquired by Tully's, which then who knows what happened to them, that disappeared into the ether. I have had a love of food and beverage and culinary stuff. And I think that it was a real interesting and heady time in coffee, in that working at Peet's and seeing what was happening there and in San Francisco, coffee has always held a prominent place. And that was really though when like I still remember when Starbucks opened their first store in San Francisco and I lived there. So it was sort of like, what is this thing? But I think it seemed attractive and mysterious in the early 90s, what second wave was, because it wasn't this enormous thing that seemed like it was everywhere. So that's how I got into it. I enjoyed the gig as a barista at Pete's, and I enjoyed learning and meeting the customers and gaining a better understanding of what I thought coffee was at that time, which is certainly very different than my understanding how it evolved.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. So the coffee shop scene in the 90s, in before getting to coffee, was definitely part of, you'd go to a coffee shop, it felt like the Friends coffee shop, Central Perk, and all that kind of stuff.
I think that Pete's was actually a little bit different at the time because it was like darker woods and like playing classical music. So it felt more a kid from Milwaukee's imagined idea of what a European cafe felt like, right?
Oh, sure.
In San Francisco at the time too, there were still the cafes that were in North Beach, so the true like Cafe Trieste, or however you say that, if I'm saying it incorrectly, but that felt more Italian. And then you had Pete's, which at that time, I worked there. I want to say it was 93. It was really in its like heyday. It was muscular and expanding. And if you want to say, I don't know if cutting edge is the right word, but people were very into this premise of like Berkeley, the gourmet ghetto, whatever it's called now. It had a lot of culinary panache at that time. So it wasn't the big goofy mugs and couches and friends like. I think that came in the 90s. Then there was everything that happened after. In the Bay Area in the early 90s was an interesting time to be in coffee there. So that was my entree into specialty coffee.
So you were captivated by this and you had business experience beforehand. So it feels like the combination of having caught the culture and the vibe and also having some knowledge of what it takes to be in business is a perfect combination of saying, like, I want to do something in business with this feeling and make this available to other people. And the original concept for Intelligentsia, I'm really curious to hear about what are people going to experience when they walk into it. Even with a name like Intelligentsia, it feels like, ooh, exclusive.
I have a degree in history for whatever that's worth. And then the idea that those 4 years were some sort of in-depth learning about business kind of makes me chuckle looking back on it. It's good. It failed and we learned something about what one would want to do and what one would wish to avoid. So that was helpful. The interesting part about working for Pete's in the early 90s and even Spinelli was that they held themselves up very well as well conceived, if you want to say brands and concepts, even with Starbucks coming. To me, that was evidence that, a well-conceived idea could work, even with competition, so to speak. So I think that the idea for Intelligentsia and being a historian was that this idea that, coffee has this long history, and a lot of it is tied to this idea of the people that would hang out in coffee houses were often like the philosophers, poets, mathematicians, etc. They were a bit more of, that category of people. And those people were often referred to as the intelligentsia. As such, or it was, penny universities, they were called because you could get a cup of coffee for a penny. And rather than being a place where there was drunkenness like a pub, there was talk of, whether it was revolution or intellectual things, etc., at the coffee houses, and hence the basis for the name. And then as far as the concept and the idea of bringing this to Chicago, at that point in history, I think there were a couple of people that roasted coffee in Chicago, but nobody that was roasting on premise, which is what we did at the beginning. And to provide an environment that had a bit more, it certainly wasn't friends. It wasn't couches. Actually, I think we did have a couch at one point, but it was this idea of something a little bit more homey, less corporate, if you will, because again, Starbucks was really rising in 1995. So we wanted an environment that was welcoming, that valued the craft of coffee for what we knew of it at the time, and to elevate that and to bring more people into it and to make it accessible. So although the name may have seemed a bit esoteric, I don't think that the idea was to make it exclusive. The idea was to make it inclusive.
Mm.
So I think that there were historically people that were a little put off by the name, but I think that we chose that versus calling it like, Java the Hut or the Java Hut or something with the word grounds in it, or, not to say any of those are bad names, but we wanted something that would be distinctive and memorable and actually alluded to something historical. We wanted an environment where the premise of learning a bit more about coffee could be possible.
And you yourselves were in the process of learning a bit more about coffee as you were undergoing this venture. As everybody who starts a coffee shop is not entering fully formed and static, I hope. So, your approach to how you offered coffee in the beginning, I mean, the first year of launching, I believe it was a Lakeview store. How did that go? How did you all manage your approach to coffee and people as leaders in this space while you're still learning yourself?
Well, look, I think that you do the best you can with what you know, right? I mean, and I think that, if you were to look at the coffee menu at Intelligentsia now versus then, or even as it changed and evolved, we were taking from what we knew, which was, lots of blends, and single origin was less, if you want to say vetted or less understood at the time. Seasonality in single origin was almost non-existent in terms of understanding. So I think that it was more of these placeholders on a, if you want to call it a menu, that we thought we had to have. And certainly I looked at, what Pete's did and what Spinelli did and considered that. So in Chicago at the time, this idea of like freshly roasted coffee with an interesting menu, if you will, of choices, and then single origin, and then, listing the regions and all that stuff. It made a lot of sense and frankly was not that widespread in Chicago at the time. Here you have a pretty sophisticated, culinarily forward city without that. So we wanted to offer the best version that we knew of at the time of that. And, I think that there were certainly difficult days for a while, and Chicago can be a tough town in terms of new stuff like that. And at that time, which is before the internet, before the internet really took hold, winning things like Best of Chicago, those kind of awards actually had, before they were just now kind of tossed around very easily and you can win on that stuff, helped us ascend.
And you did. I think that you were representing what I think a lot of people considered the bleeding edge of what specialty coffee at the time could do. And I believe that that was sort of like the calling card of Intelligentsia because, yes, you're learning and you're being inspired by others, but you're also taking risks to do things in your menu that you feel are the right move. And I'm curious about maybe what some of those decisions were that seemed risky, but were kind of a leadership move rather than I'm inspired by something somebody else is doing.
The biggest things you can point to in that regard didn't happen right away, right? I mean, I think that if you want to say it was risky to offer a menu with coffees from around the world and blends and all that stuff with good design, I guess we didn't perceive it as particularly risky. The way that we dug into sourcing as we had greater knowledge of how it all worked. And then I think the barista craft, and I think even things like the sizing of the drinks and all of those pieces, those choices could be perceived by many as becoming increasingly risky. I think that for us, they really were core to what we believed in. And I think that, to me, now looking back on if you want to say a career in business, those moves, although at the time, those are the things that make you. They have a point of view about what your brand is and what you think and how you support it. It's not just copying something else that is out there. You may be influenced by it, but I think that those were core to what defined us. They were things that defined us. So I think that, if you want to say that the whole formation of direct trade, it became core to what Intelligentsia was. The whole barista craft became core to what Intelligentsia was. The whole idea that like cappuccino is a cappuccino size. It's not 8, 12, 16, and 20 ounce, right? Because that's no longer that drink. I mean, I think there was a point where we ascended, as I said, and if we opened in 95, the 20 ounce drink was becoming popular elsewhere, and we had it for a while, and then we're like, we're not going to do this anymore. We moved to having where, the sizes were right size, and they were sized such that they made the best version of that drink in that size. And then the whole investment in the barista craft was something that we're like, yeah, this makes sense to what we say we're about. So we should invest in this and dig into this. So, if you ask me what the tenets were, it got to be the premise of like direct trade sourcing, elevated barista craft, digging in on knowledge and seasonality. Were those risks? I guess you could look at it that way, but to me, those seem like what we had to do to remain true to what we said we were.
What did you say you were?
Well, I think we said we were about this idea of the most immersive coffee experience that could be offered. And that would include everything from the way that we interacted with the producers and what that meant to the way that we made the drinks and offered them to our customers in our cafes, to the training that we offered, to the way we thought about all of it, to the way that the producers were rewarded, so that it had a completeness from the beginning, starting at source, to the end in the customer's cup. And that each of those pieces would be considered, and that we would wish to excel and be among the best at doing each part of that chain.
What role did leadership and structure and management have in ensuring that as you leaned into these things, you had a foundation to bring consistency in the cappuccinos and the blends, the roasting? And as that expanded, you moved from one to two to many stores in Chicago. That's a logistical challenge. How does that look?
The other thing too is the in-store experience in terms of how it feels,
Oh, yeah.
and design. And I think that's the other piece too, that I feel like bringing design, like a high level of design to cafes, that was utterly transformative. And I think utterly transformative and set the tone for what followed. Perhaps we were doing it at the same time as everyone, I can't say, but I can certainly point to Intelligentsia and Silver Lake and say either that was influential or that happened at a time when everybody else was thinking the same thing. And then that design became utterly critical to the kind of coffee bar experience that followed thereafter for what defined coffee.
It remains one of my favorite cafes of Intelligentsia to this day.
How does one get it to happen across and consistency? And I would say this is the piece that is critical in building a business that really works and lasts and that everyone gets it. It's culture, right? It's the culture of your business and what you believe in and what that envelops. And I think that that's the piece that I can say. You look across our lifetimes and the brands and products, which sounds kind of cold and whatever, but the companies whose things you enjoy interacting with, the cultures at those companies are incredibly strong. And you've done your work at your coffee company when one barista says to the other, like, you can't put that drink out. That doesn't meet our standards. We can't source this coffee. This doesn't live up to what we think coffee should be. We need to tidy this joint up because this is not what we say we are. So I think that, I can't remember where I read, but culture like eats everything. And it's setting that standard of what you will and will not accept. And I think that there are places and people that will say that if you grow, you need to compromise something. And I would use a stronger word, but this is a family podcast, but that's baloney. Okay, you can invest in those things and you decide when you compromise. It doesn't happen to you. And the way that you keep compromise from happening is if you begin to see it, you say, look, we're not doing that. We're not cutting a corner here. We're not going to let this get away from us. You can look at companies, and I'll always mention this and everyone sort of nods. Patagonia, here's a company that's been around for many, many decades, and the product quality is not diminished. If anything, they're getting more crotchety about how water resistant and how environmentally friendly and how good the zipper works and how many times you can return it. So having integrity about your culture and not letting it slip is the thing that drives all of that. You need to have standards, high standards, and you need to document what those things look like, and you need to make sure everyone understands it, and then you need to make sure everyone understands why they should understand it. And that's the piece. I mean, I guess culture is like, it's this, why do we do it this way? And this is what we all point to, and this is what we subscribe to. And having that is what makes for powerful companies that do good things and take good care of their people so that everyone understands what it is they're all supposed to be doing. And I think that's the piece that is, I remember I was in the car with someone and they're like, oh, look at, the sign at your new location in Boston is really beautiful. I'm sure that you had your hand in designing and making sure that the sign looked exactly the way that you wanted it. And I said, no, I had nothing to do with it other than the culture saying this is what we should do. So then it turned out looking the way that it should have. So culture reaches into every piece of that. And that includes how do you think about training? How do you think about the coffees? How do you think about the producers? How do you think about the experience? So, entropy does happen, and you can see it when culture is not considered or fed or upheld.
And I also am imagining that in lieu of ensuring a cultural continuity across the cafes and integrity in the values exercised in the cafes and the behind the bar and the cafe, et cetera, is expediency of expansion and opportunity that's taken. And I mean, obviously, Intelligentsia has expanded quite a bit in those years, especially in the middle 2000s, the earlier 2000s. But it didn't as much as it probably could have. And I wonder if it's because there was that integrity piece that did it prevent you from taking on too much in order to make sure that the right opportunity was taken and not just a opportunity.
I would say that it's probably honestly a little of both. There were probably opportunities that we did not take, and then there were probably opportunities that we shouldn't have taken. So I think that it can be a little bit of both. And I think the challenge is sometimes you don't know, what you don't know. You don't know about a location and how it can perform. You may be testing a different concept. Will it work? Won't it work? And I think that the challenge over time became that because the companies that were leading the industry did good work, it made it easier for other companies to get into the industry. And as such, there were more people in it, or more cafes, more roasters, more whatever. Whether or not they were all doing good work, I cannot say. You can draw your own conclusions. Regardless, that created more, I'll put it in quotes, competition, so that, if you had a 2 mile, I was, most recently visiting my daughter at school in Los Angeles and stayed in the arts district and rode my bicycle from the arts district to the Intelligentsia in Silver Lake. And I remember when that cafe first opened, I could have ridden my bike from the arts district to Silver Lake and ridden past maybe 2 cafes, maybe 3. I would say that there were close to 100 between those 2 points. The challenge of the coffee bar business now, if there was one cafe and then there are 10 in the same 10 blocks, inevitably that erodes the business that the one cafe does, regardless of how good or bad the other 9 are. There's just more people doing it. And looking at the opportunities and the timing of that for Intelligentsia, I think that the expansion from Chicago to Los Angeles was seminal in creating what the brand became. Our timing was about the same as some other roasters that were of our ilk to expand to other cities. And the premise of taking something that was perhaps regional to making it national, and those moves, it kind of sends a message about the brand and what it can become. So I think that some of that is brand and marketing, and then some of that is also opportunity. And I always very much love Los Angeles and find it an interesting place. And if you look at it now, and the coffee landscape, you could argue that it's probably the place where there are now the most coffee bars and people are doing really interesting stuff. And you could probably suggest that somehow or another Seattle was the hotbed or something, but I think that it actually moved to Los Angeles from a creative standpoint. I'm sure someone will argue with me about that. But to answer your question about opportunities and expansion and all those things, I think that, again, one makes moves based on the information that one has. One doesn't wish to do things that are self-destructive. One wishes to do things that are thoughtful. Do you always get it right? Absolutely not. Do you hope to get it right more of the time than you get it wrong? Yes. It's not like we were buying lots of studies, data-rich studies from whoever was selling the study of where to open coffee bars. And the analytics at the time were not as strong as they are now. I think you could probably look at things like, where is most of this business coming from or that business coming from? Where does it match up with the demographic? All of those things. I tend to think that those things lag a little bit. I can tell you that if I were to go out and get real estate studies at the time of if it was smart to move into Silver Lake or Venice, they would say no, right? And they would be dead wrong, because we wanted to be on the leading edge. We didn't want to follow everyone else in, and be next to the same 5 national chains that are doing salads or soups, ice cream, pick it. So a lot of it is really go see the real estate, look at it on the ground. How does it feel? Does this line up with what we think is the right kind of place for us to be in? And go from there.
You serve the people that are there, as well as presenting the brand in a way that at this point, when you're expanding, you're gaining a lot of national attention. And so there's inevitably going to be a concern for the perception of the brand beyond the neighborhoods that the coffee shop is in at that point. And I'm curious about that, because as large as the brand is and influential and heavily involved in competitions and awards, are just kind of pouring in for Intelligentsia. The presence, especially in competitions, was just so huge in the day. Balancing the idea that these cafes are local and serving local people, but also at the same time representing something a lot larger than local. How did that kind of play into the way that operations took place on a corporate and store-wide level?
Again, I think that the investment in the competitions, et cetera, was a nod to the idea that training was important. We should invest in the things we say we believe in. And to me, for whatever you think of barista competitions, it informs a lot. The tidiness of bar, the way you pull the shots, all of that stuff, being efficient, effective, etc., is not a bad basis for considering how you think about barista operations and a cafe operation. So to me, it's like those things line up well. You could say it's a waste of money, but I don't think that it is. I think it creates the idea that there's a competition, there's something that you can do that you do every day, and then have a competition surrounding it, I think was very powerful. I don't know if you put your World Barista Championship trophy up in your cafe, if, whatever, most people that are still wondering what the difference between a macchiato and a cortado, if they're like, oh, geez, look at that thing. I guess they must be really good at making coffee. I mean, it doesn't hurt, but I think that a lot of it was saying, in speaking of culture, that at the company level, hey, we invest in these things. We believe in these things. So we're not just paying them lip service to say we believed in the craft of the barista. Like, we'll invest in it. We'll send you to places so you can do it and compete. And that is powerful. And then I think at the local level, you also have to not have your head in the sand, and you have to realize that still a lot is about meeting the customer where they're at and bringing them along. So I think that they can have an appreciation for that trophy that's up there, right? So if they say, well, whoa, these drinks are so good. What did you do to this milk? And you can say, well, look, we compete in these competitions. We have rigorous training. We want to bring you something that is like this wonderful culinary experience for under $5, $6, something like that on a daily basis that makes your life a little bit better. That's how you meet them where they're at. And I think that, we could all probably agree that at the same time, in kind of the mid to late aughts, the coffee thing got a little navel gazing-y, where, the customer is like, what are you talking about? We don't care. We just want to have a really good cappuccino or a really good latte, right? Still the top seller. So all this other stuff you're talking about, I don't even know what you're talking about. And I just want that. So I think you need to be able to provide that. And then if you have a receptive audience, you can then begin to explore the rest of it.
Yeah, well said. The integration of those two things together, obviously, the people have been doing this now, then competitions are just a part of the fabric of the industry, and they become a fabric of operations as well. Not having your head in the sand is one of those things, like you just mentioning how navel gazy we were, just brought back so many memories.
Well, and I think if you look at the ascension of the coffee companies that, have had their 15 or 30 minutes of fame, you would suggest that they were ones that did excel in these competitions, whether it was tasting or barista or roasting or all of that stuff. If you hear the same name over and over again in different arenas, you begin to realize that they're investing in the things that make a coffee company stand out and become successful. And inevitably, it seems that those companies were the ones that fared well economically over time.
Yeah, and that's kind of bringing us neatly to this point where Intelligentsia has expanded to both coasts, I believe. Then you've got New York and you've got Los Angeles, you got Chicago, and then the infrastructure to support that through roasting. I believe roasting in Los Angeles, of course, and then I'm not sure about New York, if there's a roasting facility in New York.
No.
Okay. So, but at that time, you gained attention not just from the coffee community, which was just a given at that time. It was a household name in the industry, but technically, I guess, outside the industry, all the way back to your roots with Pete's and this acquisition that happened, which was a earthquake in the industry, frankly, at the time. And so I'm curious about that because from the outside perspective, it just felt like, what is going on? And now that you've built this up for us, in the development of Intelligentsia, obviously you're going to gain attention from outside our little niche specialty competition group. So how did that come about, and what was the thinking in going forward with something like that?
There's a long span of time between 1995 and 2015.
Just a bit.
That's 20 years, right? So I think that's worth considering. The premise was to take it to another level. And I think that, there's always complexity if one is acquired or if you're partially acquired or you take on investors and all those things. Those add complexity. You wish to have the economic wherewithal to continue to grow. And I think that growth is a real interesting thing because I think that there are people that will say that you shouldn't do it. And I would suggest that if you grow thoughtfully, you actually create opportunity for more people. I've always said that, and I still believe it. So I think if you have one really busy coffee bar, the likelihood that it will benefit anybody profoundly other than the owner is unlikely. If you can grow a business that can have more economic might than that, and I think if you were to ask me what I'm most proud of about Intelligentsia is that people had families and they sent their kids to school and they bought houses and all of that, all from a place that started with, a coffee roaster and 6 employees in a little shop in Lakeview in Chicago. So to me, there is that element where you are creating opportunity for other people besides yourself. There is a point where self-funding and kind of, I don't want to say trudging along, not that you're trudging along, but the opportunity to expand and make it more expansive is more challenged, right? If you don't have the economic wherewithal. So I think that given where coffee was in 2015, first off, it had been 20 years, so that's an amount of time. And then that we could keep it going and that it could become even bigger and create more opportunity was there. And of course, there's the economic reward for the people that built it, right? So I'm not ashamed to say that it was a lot of hard work from 1995 to 2015, and I would like to reap the reward of that. Yeah, I think it was good timing. You could argue that some other roasters had even better timing. That's business. One can build and sell businesses. And I think if you build it right and build the culture right, and I think that, frankly, Intelligentsia is still doing really great work at sourcing, roasting, execution, et cetera. So 2015 was a good time to do it.
And you, at that time, took a break. What was it, like 4 years or so?
No, because I got into, started a bicycle company and then realized that the acquisition in 2015, it wasn't complete. I was still involved in the business. I wasn't involved in the day-to-day, et cetera, but I was still involved at a board level, still interacting with the CEO. And that was until May of last year. So there was still a 7-year involvement after 2015 as part of the structure of the deal.
I guess in some sense, the designation between those eras where you're responsible for board things and you're involved, but you're working on these other projects. You mentioned cycling and eventually what became the Meteor. Well, everybody, I hope that you enjoyed that conversation. One of the things that I really appreciate about Doug's approach to business is the idea that we are producing something that is kind of it has to be a holistic experience. Something that is not only excellent in design, to the shop, excellent in quality, and the idea of what Intelligentsia has taken on over the years, whether we're talking about the Venice store or Silver Lake or the Chicago cafes, the High Line in New York, or you name it, there's something unique about the way they're approaching each one of these projects that really showcases their dedication to thinking through what is it we're doing and how can we put our heart into that. And that is a reflection of how Doug has pursued business, is putting the heart into the work of pushing the envelope in craft coffee, in service and design. So I'm really grateful for having Doug on the show. You should go to learn more about Intelligentsia at intelligentsiacoffee.com. But the next episode is the next gear for Doug, part 2. The story doesn't end here. Now we go to the founding of the Meteor, which channels Doug's love for cycling, coffee, innovation, food, and I think you're really going to enjoy this one as well. So get ready and cue that one up right after this one, and I will see you here on that episode. Thank you very much, everybody. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback for me about today's episode, it's chris@keystotheshop.com. Please reach out. And don't forget to contact me if you're interested in Keys to the Shop consulting to work with you one-on-one to help you improve your cafe, find solutions, and build a thriving coffee shop. chris@keystotheshop.com. See you on the next episode, and as always, I hope that this one has truly given you keys to the shop.